it's good to have discussions about stuff as you're learning it. And while I'm a fan of writing and text, making videos is also a way of doing that. And a lot of people seem to prefer videos and talking. They're not really used to written discussions. So it's a perfectly reasonable way to get started. And in the long run, I think it's good to know how to do both and to use a mix of formats. But if people find talking verbally easier at the beginning, then they should talk verbally and they should share some of their talking. And YouTube's a good way to do that. And then they can get feedback and commentary and stuff like that. It's harder to respond to videos that don't have a transcript. It's harder to like quote things and give precise replies, so there are downsides, but it's worlds better than nothing, and it also does have some upsides. Making videos helps with public speaking for sure. I've gotten better at talking to a microphone with practice. When I started, the first videos I made a bunch of were email writing, and I spent most of the video not talking, and I just wrote the email and occasionally I'd make comments. And then after I made like 25 of them or something, they're in my YouTube archives. Like I gradually talked more. And now some of my videos for emails, I just like talk the whole time and don't even write replies. So I can do it either way, like do it more as a podcast or more as writing. But I started as a writer, like for the first, I don't know, 8 years as a philosopher. I did written discussions almost entirely and not much verbal discussion. I haven't gone to conferences because I don't know what to say there that would be productive, and I think that they're about social networking and in-person interactions. Like they're too focused on meeting people and having verbal conversations instead of having like serious philosophy conversations. Like if they really cared about having discussions, they would have the same things like year round online, and then the conferences would just be like a bonus, which are like more social, but you know, they have some upsides. But they focus on the conferences. Like they really want to hang out with people rather than the main point being to discuss ideas, which can be done over the internet, no problem. Like the difference, if you take what you can do online and then you compare it to what you can do at a conference, you look only at the differences, the advantages for the conference and the ways that it sets itself apart are really social oriented. And I am not good at impressing people socially, and I don't particularly want to be. So I don't think I would be very effective at a conference. It's hard to say. But like the concept doesn't appeal to me a lot. Like I think if I got a lot of attention, I could talk in a way that would be notable. But you have to like do certain social things to get attention in the first place. Like to actually be the person who's doing a lot of the talking with a group of people being around and listening. And like arranging that is tricky. There are a lot of people who are good at being socially pushy and like getting a lot of the speaking time for themselves and taking control of conversations in superficial ways and not letting it get to the point where you actually get to ask them a bunch of questions. Like if they get enough control over conversation flow, you can't ask them enough questions and actually get into the like important details of the issues, then it's hard to get anywhere with people. I think that social skills, it's like Rand talks about social metaphysics. There's a lot of stuff that's very manipulative and dishonest, like social climbing. And I think that's what people are impressed by. Like, I think, in short, people are irrational and they're impressed by irrational social behavior. And you have to jump through certain hoops and follow certain unwritten rules, and then they like you better. And I don't like to play those games. They wouldn't give me the stage if I went to a conference. So, like, if I had the stage and everyone was listening to me, then I could just talk about ideas, and hopefully the best couple people would be like, oh, that's really good. And maybe some other people as well. But if you don't have the stage, if you're just sort of like meeting people in the hallways, like for informal talking, then it's hard to get to do a significant amount of the talking while also having a significant audience that's paying attention. Like it's reasonably easy to talk to like one or two people individually. Although even then, like starting conversations, with people I find difficult because I just want to like start talking about ideas, but they want to say hi and like other social things, like who are you and why are you here, and those are not epistemology. There are other issues like IRL conversations and voice are too slow. Like they're at 1x. Like I'd much rather watch a video of someone's lecture at 2.5x speed than watch the original lecture in person. Like I'd get bored waiting for them to say the rest of the words. So I don't like attending lectures in person. Similarly, I do not go to movie theaters. I have not been to a movie theater for a long time because I don't like watching videos at a slow pace. In-person friends are okay. So first of all, you can have online friends, and that has a large portion of the benefits because like the main thing you do with people is communicate with them, and you can do that online. But second of all, sure, you can have friends, but I don't think that if I went to Ocon, I would be good at making friends, and I don't think that even if I found some people I liked, it's not very likely they would live at the same location as I do. Because it's like, Ocon is a bunch of people flying in from different places. So it's not like a local meetup. I've been to local objectivist groups, I've been to several different ones, and talked with people. Those are a lot more manageable because you'll have, say, 12 people there, and it's not that hard to get the opportunity to say some things where all the other people there get to hear you, and then if you say impressive things, they'll notice. So I find smaller groups are easier to deal with and manage. Like, you can essentially get some stage time where everyone's listening to you if you're at a small meetup. It's not that hard. And then if anyone likes what you're saying, you can get more time either with the group or with them separately. One of the things I liked about the meetups that I went to is they were not in the like lecturer / audience format. So it wasn't like this guy has the stage, he's the authority that we're all supposed to look up to, and then everyone else is the plebs, the masses, the regular people. All of the meetup groups I went, it was basically like a peer group. So no one was like really leading or in charge very much. Like some people set the agenda, like we're gonna read this Ayn Rand article this week and go through it. But then like people would take turns reading it and everyone could comment. So no one was like the lecturer, which also makes it easier to share your ideas with people because there isn't like the guy above you who's gets to say what the truth is, who's assumed to know all the right answers about objectivism. In fact, I actually liked some of the people at one of the groups I went to because they were perfectly willing to criticize Peikoff, and they had some issues with some of the things he wrote. But then when we read Rand stuff, the reactions were a lot more positive, and I generally agreed with that. Whereas ARI does not do that. I think in-person friends are overrated, and there's certain ways they're used badly. Like a lot of people use them for drinking, and they use them for like hanging out and relaxing and chilling rather than for like productive activities. And I think those activities are overrated. Like if you need to rest sometimes, and sometimes you want to rest in the company of others, that's okay, but I don't think it's like a major activity. There are a variety of completely reasonable activities that you cannot do online with people, like playing frisbee. You can throw a frisbee back and forth, only with your in-person friend. And if you have a large enough group of people in person who are not necessarily good friends, but just like, you know, associates in person who can organize a frisbee game, then you can play like a competitive 6-on-6 game or whatever, which is also a perfectly reasonable activity. I am personally very intellectually oriented. I used to play some sports, but I've been doing less, and I do a lot of writing and reading and philosophy and stuff like that. There's other things. There's practical stuff. Like you can do batch cooking. You can cook for 4 people, and if you have people you live with or hang out with regularly, friends or family, then you know, they can eat some of the food and then later they can batch cook something. There's like body language stuff, which is body language has a bunch of downsides, but it also has some upsides. Like it does let you communicate some things like faster. Some activities are really awkward to do online. Like watching TV together over the internet is awkward. Like the software doesn't support it that well for like staying in sync, and either of you can pause and like talk about it in real time. It does not work as well as just watching in person together, which I think you shouldn't do that the majority of the time. Like the majority of the time you should watch things at your own pace, on your own schedule, at your own speed, and then you can just talk about it afterwards when you've both watched it. But it's perfectly reasonable to sometimes be watching something at the same time, so you can comment on it midway through and share your thoughts before you're at the end. Like there are some advantages to that. It's more of a hassle in terms of like scheduling and organizing it that way, but it has some advantages. Some virtues are more important for friendship than others. Like if a person is rational and honest, but they're not very productive, you could still be friends with them and have like good conversations with them. And then if when they're not with you, like they waste a lot of their time, that sucks, but it's not directly affecting you. Whereas if they're like dishonest while they're with you, that would be directly affecting you. A lot of people are friends basically based on like who they met in school or who they met at work, or it's rather than like seeking out actual philosophers. I've written about this in this article called Philosophy First. I said that you should look for people who are philosophically compatible with you and like maximize that, and then worry about other interests in common second. Like if they play chess or poker or they like to go swimming, all of those are secondary compared to like intellectual compatibility. And like I talked about how it's very hard to teach someone philosophy who's like philosophically bad. But if they're philosophically good, then they can learn a particular activity to do with you, like chess or whatever. Chess actually takes a long time to learn, even if you're really, really smart and good at learning. It's just a very hard game. It takes a ton of study. But there are a ton of activities that can be learned pretty quickly if you're a good thinker. So if you make friends with someone who's a good thinker, then you would have access to like most activities because they could just pick up any new activity. And they're like a lot nicer to be around, and when problems come up, you'll be able to do actual problem solving. Whereas if you just find someone who likes biking or picnics or whatever TV show you currently watch, who's not a philosopher, not a thinker, then whenever problems come up with that person, it's going to be hard because then you have to go into philosophy mode to do problem solving, but they're not a philosopher, so it's not going to work. Anyway, so with friends, there are both theoretical advantages and like practical advantages that are like life doesn't have to be that way, but it kind of is. Like people in our culture, they grow up expecting to have friends. That's part of like sort of how they plan their life. They're used to it. So about friends, right? People grow up like expecting to have friends. Our culture encourages friendships. So they play a larger role in life than I think they necessarily have to, because our culture gives them a large role. So in order to change yourself would be like a big effort, and that's not necessarily like a good thing to do. Even if the way our culture deals with friends is not perfectly ideal, it could be like a bunch of work to change while only getting, say, a small benefit, because it's, while not perfectly ideal, it's like within reason. It's not too bad. So I think there's like a lot of higher priority things if you're going to try to change yourself. So just being the kind of person who likes to have some friends seems like a reasonable thing to leave alone, or at least not change very much. So there's different type of friends. Like a lot of people have, maybe buddies is a good word, who they can go like drinking with and they can invite to their barbecues. And they don't actually know very much about each other. They interact in pretty stereotyped ways. Like the buddies come over to watch the football game and eat nachos. That's a different kind of thing than having a friend who you can actually talk with about your life situation and, get advice on your life problems and so on. Some people have buddies that they've had that buddy for like 20 years and they never actually got very close. And they don't actually know much about each other. This isn't too surprising in a world where people do that with their spouses as well. People can have like a wife for 20 years and they know what kinds of food the wife likes and doesn't like. They know some types of things about each other that are considered like personal details or something. But they might only know about their wife superficially in a lot of ways. Like a lot of people just sort of interact in default ways instead of customized ways, so it's not personalized or individualized very well. It's like they expect from their wife or husband, after 20 years of marriage, a lot of things that are just the default thing that you would expect from any wife or husband. I think buddies are an okay thing to have, but you have to know what they are. Like it can be convenient to have buddies for some activities. I think people spend too much of their time like around buddies or around strangers or around coworkers or around other students of the same school, and that they don't get enough time where they're either alone or with people where they can like talk completely freely. Like when you're hanging out with your buddies, you either cannot talk freely about all of your ideas because they're not philosophers, or else you just like don't have many ideas that are very controversial or hard to understand or complex or whatever. Like when you hang out with buddies, what you can say to them is not that different than what you can say to your coworkers at the water cooler. So it's like limited. It's a bit like being in public, where you have to like watch what you say a bit, and I think people spend too much of their lives in that situation instead of people should spend more time like literally alone and thinking about thoughts themselves and with no one there to like influence them and control them. Like that's also an important thing to do. What I meant about buddies being convenient is like if you don't have to go out of your way too much, like I wouldn't put a lot of effort into getting a bunch of buddies. But if you already have them or you were already doing something that let you find them in an easy way, then you might use them sometimes. Like as long as you can get them cheaply, then you might find there's more value in some cases than the cost of getting them or using them. But I wouldn't go way out of your way to seek them out. Part of the issue with most people is they're not good at actually communicating what they mean. Like they have trouble actually putting into words a lot of their thoughts. And so the normal way people communicate and how they interact with a lot of their IRL friends is there's a lot of body language and there's a lot of guessing. It's sort of like the reaction GIFs that you see on Twitter and Reddit, or just emoticons and emojis, where people don't actually want to put into words what they actually mean, not even to themselves. Like they don't know it themselves, and then they want communication to work even without knowing verbally what they mean. And I think there's a lot that's wrong with that. Like nonverbal communication, I'm not going to say it's all bad or wrong or whatever. You can use it some, but it's super overrated because people are bad at verbal communication. And if you're bad at verbal communication, it makes IRL seem more valuable to you and internet communication seem less valuable. Whereas if you're better at verbal communication, you're going to see less of a downside to using the internet to interact with friends. I guess there's different types of molding. It would sort of depend. Like, I learned a lot of ideas from David Deutsch, like capitalism. So, but molding would not be a good description of, you know, getting in debates about economics and being persuaded of capitalism. But the broad outcome could be seen as many of my opinions changed from my old opinion to the same opinion David Deutsch had. So in some sense, it's kind of like molding. Potential is an interesting topic. I have tried to help a lot of beginners because basically beginners are the only thing that are available. But I think I've overdone it with helping people who like don't really have any accomplishments. So in some sense, like everyone has infinite potential. Everyone has a mind, a brain. They can reason. Like everyone's potential is to learn that they could learn anything in theory. And but I think in the past I've been too easily impressed that someone seems to be learning some stuff. But I think that they have good potential to learn more. And what actually happens in general is of the people who start learning some philosophy stuff, like a lot of people don't get started, and some do get started and they learn some stuff, and that's good and that's better. But of those people, usually what happens is they learn until it gets hard. Like the reason they got started and learned some philosophy is they found it easy. It resonated with them. It clicked right away. So it was going smoothly for them. Which you could view that as, oh, they're so good at it, it's easy for them. That's a really good sign about them. But I think what often happens is They keep learning stuff as long as it's easy, and then they get to a hard part, and then they get stuck, and they stay stuck. They never get past the first like hard part. I think that's a common pattern. So if you're going to try to help someone a lot, it would be good if like they'd gotten stuck and then unstuck. Like they'd solved a major problem rather than just doing the beginning part where they learn whatever they find easy to learn. Things about potential is if they actually are a content creator, I think that's a really good sign. If they've written like 100+ blog posts and made 100+ videos, you can have a lot more confidence that they're going to stay interested in that stuff in the future and keep doing things and keep learning more. Whereas if they only consume content, like read things and watch things, plus have discussions where there's a back and forth interaction, but they don't make content by themselves, then you have to be a lot more worried. Some people have major accomplishments, like they've written a book or made a bunch of good videos or written something important, or David Deutsch like made some actual breakthroughs in quantum physics. Some people have like, you know, really big accomplishments like that. Like he won a $100,000 prize and got into the Royal Society. Those kinds of things are also good signs. It has to be like a real accomplishment, not just an accomplishment according to most people. Like making a popular music video is not really the kind of accomplishment I mean. Like some people put skill into their music videos and some not so much. Or at least not a type of skill that's very relevant. One of the ways I look at the world and the issue of finding people who are already good versus people who have to like learn a bunch before they could catch up is I know 1, Ayn Rand, and 2, Karl Popper stuff. And it's reasonably easy to like look at each of those individual communities and like get some sort of sense of how good the people are and what's available there. But what's a lot clearer is the overlap. Like, how many people in the world already know both of those to a really high level? And I think the answer is approximately 0 people who are not aware of FI. And if that's correct, then there's virtually no chance that I'll learn someone who doesn't need to learn at least one of Popper or objectivism. So I'm expecting to meet people who have a lot to learn only. Even looking at only the objectivist community, I don't have high hopes for really great people being in that community, and I haven't found them. Like, I would expect them to stand out in some way. It's not that hard to get noticed by writing objectivist material or making videos or something. Like, there's not so many objectivists who are making a lot of content that there's not a huge danger of overlooking people, I think. Like, there's definitely some danger. You can overlook someone who's made a fair amount of stuff, but it's a small enough community of objectivists who actually are like involved online and care about it a lot that if someone really wants to get noticed and seen by a lot of people, they can do it. Like, I went to the Harry Binswanger list. I went to a bunch of different objectivist forums. There's like Objectivist Online. There's a John Galt forum. There's Solo Passion. There's Rebirth of Reason. There's like 2 more or something. And I went to the Objectivist Q&A website. There was like a Stack Exchange format. And so I got my name out there. Oh, I went to the Facebook groups, several of those. So like if you do all that and you post like links to some of your essays or whatever, you can totally be noticed. So if someone else had like written a bunch of great stuff and really wanted to be noticed by me, it seems reasonable that they could either get noticed at like some of those groups or could just find me because I've written a bunch of objectivism stuff. Like, I don't think that there's someone who's like me and has made like tons of content and been really into objectivism for so long and would be unable to either find me or get noticed by me. So that seems kind of unlikely to me. And then for someone who knows objectivism and Popper, I think it's just pretty out of the question. The Popper community is smaller than the objectivist community, and I would say worse. Like, it's harder. There's a lot of objectivists who are pretty good. That's actually reasonably common to just meet an objectivist and you talk to them and you're like, hey, this guy was like a lot smarter than most people I meet. He knows some stuff. He's pretty reasonable. There's a lot of like decent objectivists, which is a really good sign about Ayn Rand, I think. I would not give the credit to like ARI for that. Whereas with critical rationalism, a lot of the like random people you talk to are just like not very good, like not impressive people. So it's hard to find critical rationalists who actually have a decent, solid understanding of the material and know what they're talking about. Whereas with objectivists, you can find people who know the basics pretty well. So to find someone who actually knew objectivism and critical rationalism, and they actually were good at the critical rationalism part, would be really surprising, because people who actually know critical rationalism properly like really stand out in a smaller community. It's the overlap argument is how I decided that I'm the best living philosopher, because you could debate whether there's someone who's better at critical rationalism than me or someone who's better at objectivism than me, but there's like not really any competition for knowing both, other than other FI related people who, acknowledge me as the leader. That idea is related to something Patio 11 said. He's a programmer who tweets stuff related to business a fair amount. And he said that it's hard to be the best programmer, and it's hard to be the best, say, Japanese English translator. However, it's not that hard to be one of the best at both of those. If you take two things and you get really good at two things, then it's not that hard to be one of the best at like the combination of both. So if you combine like being a good programmer with being good at something else, then for the combination you can qualify as great and like be a leader in the field. Because like there's plenty of people who are great at Japanese but don't program, and plenty of people who are great at programming but don't know Japanese. So there's a lot fewer who have both. There's less competition there. But from a business perspective, you can make good money if you find an area with less competition, because it involves two different skills that don't normally go together. Japanese example is because he lives in Japan, but he's a Westerner. Anyways, a lot of people hate arrogance, but I don't think that's a reason not to say something. I think that it would have helped me if I knew earlier what my status was, because I kept like looking for and expecting people to be better than they were. Like I was seeking out something that doesn't exist, I think. So I thought it was important when I figured out like a more accurate view of how good the world is and how many good people exist and how good they are and stuff like that. The way Patio 11 says it is something like, there is no hidden reserve of smart people. A lot of people have the problem where they go to like college or something and they're expecting it to actually be good. They're expecting to like actually meet good people and for their professors to be really rational and stuff. And then they get really disappointed. I didn't have that exact problem. I was extremely disillusioned about school and was expecting very little from university. But I thought that there were smart people, somewhere. Like maybe in academia, but not like lecturing undergraduates or something. I don't know. Or working for companies like Bell Labs. Because I didn't know how much the government had taken over science and how much of science was run by people who also have to do university lectures and stuff. The characters I most resonated with in Rand were Rourke and Dagny. Anyways, so I think it might be Rourke who says something like, I don't make comparisons. Like he doesn't care if he's the best architect. He's not trying to compete with other people. He's just doing his own thing. And I think that that is also important. Like, I wouldn't care if there were like 3 people better than me. I mean, other than being thrilled to have more people to talk to. Which reminds me, one of my favorite quotes. We should try hard at stuff. People hate effort. That's actually related to the social stuff, because one of the main rules of social status is whoever appears to put in less effort is higher social status. The default assumption is if you're rich, powerful, influential, if people come to you and do your bidding, then you will use that to avoid work, to avoid effort. They basically think effort is bad, and if you make it, if you're successful, then you can avoid effort. There are special exceptions where they allow someone to put in effort, like an Olympic athlete does not lose social status for putting a bunch of effort into practicing. But in general, they think effort is something to be avoided. Also, social status mostly works by how much effort it looks like you put into something, but you can put in a lot of effort behind the scenes. You just sort of hide it and don't admit you did it. I don't care that much about being respected. Like, it would be convenient, it would be useful, it'd be easier to make money, it'd be easier to get conversations with, like, busy people. some of who might be worth talking to some. But I have self-esteem, that's not a problem. There's a lot of pressure. Like, people get really mad at me for saying that I think I'm the best living philosopher. A lot of people are very hateful about that. And I think the fact that it triggers them is a reason to say it. Like, similar to how Ayn Rand uses the term selfishness. And she said, like, the reason people are afraid of it is a reason for saying it. That's in the Virtue of Selfishness introduction, I think. Anyway, that idea came out of trying to understand the actual world situation. Because, like, in the Fountainhead, here it is. So, in the Fountainhead, see, I find that Rand's books, people call Rand's fiction unrealistic. And I find it unrealistic because of how many good people there are in Atlas Shrugged. Like, I think there's too many good people who are like the productive industrialists of Colorado. There's too many people to go to Galt's Gulch. There's just like too many good notable people in the world. And it's the same thing with the Fountainhead. Like, there's Austin Heller and various other people in the book, like, and Stephen Mallory. Like, I don't find the real world has that many good people, at least when it comes to like philosophy and the intellect. And the good people in these books are always like decent philosophers. Whereas, like, there are people who are specialists in the real world who are good at something, but like in general, they're bad general purpose thinkers, like anti-capitalist or bad epistemology or something else. But I find Rand's world's like too good, and that's one of the things I had to understand about the actual world, I think. And Rand had a similar problem. See, Rand got like super famous. She sold millions of books, and she still couldn't find good people. Like, her heir Peikoff was not very good, and she didn't find a better one. No, when people say her novels are unrealistic, they mean that her heroes are, like, you can't be like that. They mean it's impossible, and they mean, but they're talking about like Rourke. See, the problem isn't Rourke, it's that there's too many good people who are actually like more normal. Like, it's the Austin Heller that I object to, but they think Austin Heller's fine, it's just Rourke who's unrealistic. And also, they think that the bad guys in the novels are straw men, whereas I think that they're not straw men, and actually a lot of stuff in real life is even worse, which is what Rand said as well. Like, when Rand was doing research on laws related to railroads, like actual historical laws, she found laws that were like worse than the ones she put in Atlas Shrugged, that were from the real world. The only saving grace for the worst real laws is that they were like smaller scale rather than countrywide. It's hard for a really bad law to be on a larger scale. Like, the larger the scale, the harder it is for a law to stick and be accepted. Whereas you can have like really ridiculous local laws. Anyway, so there's this quote. Oh yeah, about Rand personally, right. So the best person Rand found, as far as I know, is George Reisman, who, if you don't know him, his website is capitalism.net, and he wrote Capitalism, a Treatise on Economics. And he studied under Mises more than Rand, and he's an economist more than a philosopher, but he studied with Rand some. And he was on the board of directors of ARI, and Peikoff kicked him out. And I think he is better than Peikoff. As far as Peikoff, I like some of his old material. Like, some of his lectures from when Rand was still alive are actually quite good. And even shortly after her death are quite good. And then he got gradually worse over time after Rand was not there to correct him anymore. Like, I think what happened is, when Rand was alive, he would make mistakes and she would correct him and, like, you know, guide him back to the right ideas over and over. And then once her influence went away and she couldn't tell him, you know, that's a mistake, don't think that, then he just drifted further and further away from her ideas. So in this Fountainhead quote, I think the proportions are completely wrong. She says 3/4 of them don't know what it's about, but they've heard about the fighting, and they think if it's important, they have to pronounce it with respect, like look up to it. That's sort of realistic. A lot of people are impressed by someone who just gets attention in the world. Of the fighting quarter, 4/10 hate you, 3/10 feel they must express an opinion in any controversy, 2/10 play it safe and herald any discovery, and 1/10 are those who understand. So I think a tenth who understand, that's a tenth out of a quarter, so it's 2.5% of the population. And I think that's extraordinarily unrealistic. I think that the actual percentage of the population who understands Rourke is much less than 1 in 1,000, whereas she has it at 1 in 40. Because, like, imagine if it was 1 in 1,000. Then in the US, there are something like 350 million people, so you divide by 1,000, and you got like 350,000 like great people who understand. That seems like completely out of scale to me. And Rand had it at 1 in 40, so that'd be like a million. Or, no. That'd be close to 10 million people who understand with Rand's proportions. But if there were like 10 million people who get it, they'd be writing so many books and op-eds and blogs and whatever. It'd be like impossible to miss. They'd be dominating every objectivist forum online. But when you actually go to an objectivist forum, you find 0 good people. So an objectivist forum, like a random one, has, say, 50 people, and they're very self-selected. So those 50 came from, say, 1 million people. It's like 50 out of 1 million decided to go to that forum. And then what you actually find is that all of them are bad. None of them would understand Rourke. So I fear that the actual understanding rate is more like 1 in 1 million, not 1 in 40. And Rand searched very well. She sold so many books. She made the Fountainhead movie. So she did a good job of like getting a lot of attention to her ideas. So if someone was really good, they could contact her. They could take an interest in her. Like I myself have had hundreds of thousands of like online views or whatever, I think, over the years. And that has not found very many people. A lot of the people I talk with came because of taking children seriously or David Deutsch's books or stuff like that, rather than me finding them like myself. I don't know, maybe the proportions aren't like quite as bad as I think, but I think they're a lot worse than Rand has. Like much more in the direction of what I was saying than what she was saying. So Zhao asks this highlighted question. So David sort of quit philosophy or retired, which is really sad. The irrational world got him down. He should have like reread Rand and taken her advice on how to deal with an irrational culture, but he went in a different direction instead, and he wants prestige too much. He wants to be like famous, respected, to sell a lot of books, to get along with intellectuals like Steven Pinker or Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris. And I think that sort of destroyed him. It's hard to compare with people in terms of like raw smartness. It's easier to compare like knowledge and skill, which are like sort of different-ish. But anyways, like I know objectivism better than David does. I know more about Godwin, Burke, Saws, Goldratt, a lot of stuff. So I think the comparison is reasonably easy there. As well as like I'm the one who developed yes or no philosophy, not David. Like I developed paths forward, I developed overreaching. I'm the one who's making progress in critical rationalism while he's not doing a lot there. He did some in the past, like he developed static memes and rational memes. But currently I'm making progress in the field and he isn't doing much. And he's stopped having discussions, so it's not very hopeful that he will make progress in the future. And he's written a lot of like dumb things and low quality arguments on Twitter, which show that like his thinking quality has deteriorated in some way. Like he's made arguments that are like just not that clever and logical that he would not have done 10 years ago. So it's sad to see that. I'm not very hopeful of certain specific things, like finding a person who already knows a lot about objectivism and critical rationalism. You know, I don't hope for that or expect it. But I'm reasonably hopeful that, for example, I will write new articles that I like. I think I can do that. I think I can accomplish things. And I'm reasonably hopeful that my income from philosophy will go up rather than down. Like, that seems not guaranteed, but plausible. So that would be convenient and nice and stuff. I'm reasonably hopeful that some new people at some point will find some of the stuff I wrote and learn enough to tell me some criticisms I didn't think of and help me improve something. That seems like that could happen. I'm not like hopeful that someone will surpass me, but it's not out of the question at some point. It'd be nice. Like the Robert Stadler quote about the loneliness at the top. Spend a lot of time alone, and I'm not too reliant on what other people do. It was harder in the past because I used to have conversations with David like for multiple hours on most days for years. And so I sort of expected the amount of conversation in my life to go up, not down, and then it went down like a lot. So it took a sort of a transition to move away from using that resource that I was used to having that's a really useful resource, and to figure out how to do things without it. Like, I can do plenty of stuff without it, but like for an overall life, I was used to having like actual high quality critical feedback quickly in general, and that's a lot harder to get now. What put David on a bad path was multiple decades of society treating him badly, not respecting his accomplishments, not listening to his wisdom, stuff like that. I think that David was already dying when I met him, and my energy sustained him for an extra like decade. I don't know if he even would have managed to write BOI without me inspiring him, talking about ideas like being a positive energy. Like, it's helpful to have people who are actually interested in things and learning things and asking questions and coming up with ideas. It makes it easier to think about and write about a topic if you have that kind of stuff, so you don't have to put in all the initiative yourself. David did not give clear statements about what his problems were, or what went wrong, or why he quit, or any of that stuff. I did talk with him about it, but I think he didn't know himself what all the answers were, and also, to some extent, didn't want to say. I do know a variety of things that I do not want to say publicly because I don't have permission as well. Oh, okay, so it's better not to fight your culture, but if you're already homosexual, it's hard to change, so it would be like way too much work to change, so just leave it alone. Oh, this is from 2016. Okay, so when I said it's not hard to change in this sentence, what I meant is it's not inherently hard to change. Like, in theory, it shouldn't be that hard to change. However, in practice, like living in our culture and not being top 10 philosopher in the world, it is extremely hard to change because people are bad at changing things. Like, it's a lack of skill, but nevertheless, relative to one's skill level, it's very hard to change. So, and also, I don't know how big the benefits are from being heterosexual. Like, I think if you could just arbitrarily pick one, being heterosexual is better. It's more convenient in various ways. But I don't know how big a deal it really is. There are definitely like aspects of gay culture that are like optional that I think are quite bad. But if you do like a good version of being gay that's like more normal, instead of like super promiscuous or political activist or that kind of thing, then I don't know how much it matters. Yeah, I do not think it's demonic possession. It's just something, I mean, it seems to be, for a lot of people, something to do with gender roles got like confused at a young age. But only partially. Like, it's not all of gender roles got confused, it's just some aspect of it. I don't think that's like the only cause or the only explanation, but it seems like a good guess at one of the possible causes. So in that case, it's not demons, but ideas, like culturally learned stuff about what role to have in society and life, how to deal with people, etc. I think that people pay too much attention to sex stuff and should like worry about it a lot less. There's also a very important question with this kind of thing is, like, do you have a sort of stable setup life that you're reasonably happy with? Because if your sex life is already like established and going okay, then if it's not broken, don't fix it. Whereas if you had some major problem or something, then you could consider possible changes. And I don't think that being gay is like inherently immoral or something, like in the way people normally mean. Like, I don't think there's something like bad about it. I just think that our culture is more oriented towards being heterosexual. Like, there's more ideas to help heterosexuals, there's more respect for heterosexuals, and so on. So everything else being equal, it's more convenient to be heterosexual. I think sex is not that important because it's not very intellectual, is the short answer. It's sort of like playing frisbee or sports, where it's not that intellectual, and it's not super important. People say sex is super fun, but I think a lot of that is just basically indoctrination. Like, I don't think it's the physical sensations, literally, that they find so fun. I think it's the self-esteem of being accepted by a member of the opposite sex. Like, women want to be attractive, men want to be capable of getting a woman. And it's the social status. People don't want to be virgins. Like, there's a lot of social pressure relating to sex, and I think that is a lot of why people care so much about it. There's also like the whole taboo aspect and breaking taboos, and there's a lot of stuff where access to sexual information is suppressed for children. So when you keep something away from children, often they want it. That applies to non-children too, but it comes up the most with children. Like, they want to be let into the adult world, and sex is like a major symbol of the adult world that's kept away from children. That's another reason people value it, which is also, not really philosophically a good reason. Anyway, so everything being equal or anywhere in the ballpark of equal, don't fight your culture on sex. But if you already went down a certain path of having certain preferences many years ago, then it's probably something to just leave alone if it seems hard to change. This was like somewhat abstract commentary and somewhat like theme based, so I wouldn't worry about it. In an imaginary, like, hypothetical future world, sort of like a utopia, I would expect people either to be bisexual or asexual. I don't think like being monogamous to one partner of one gender would make a ton of sense. Either sex is good or sex is not good. So if sex is not good, then asexual would make sense in general. And if sex is good, then why not be bisexual? Like, if sex adds something to relationships with people, then you should have that as an option with like all people, not just people of a particular gender. Like, you shouldn't be biased about gender. But I mean, I'm also sort of against gender roles in general. Like, I don't think an ideal society would have significant gender role stuff. Especially because, like, the better technology gets, the less the physical differences between the genders matters. And also the easier it would be to change your physical characteristics, or even, upload yourself into a robot body, or just into the internet or something. I think that sex is, to a significant extent, like a bonding ritual, sort of like what they do at churches. Like, I think it's Catholic, where they eat the body of Christ, like they drink some wine and eat a cracker or something. Like, religions have various rituals which have like meaning to people, and I think sex is like that, where the actual thing going on is, friendship, sort of, should be at least, and then the physical activity is like a related ritual which has like symbolic and cultural meaning.